Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. This is episode 139.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair. All right, Clanton, you called down the thunder and now you got it. You see that? It says United States Marshal. Wyatt, please don't kill me, don't kill me. Take a good look at him, Mike. Because that's the way you're going to end up. The Cowboys are finished. You understand me? I see a red sash. I kill the man wearing it. Now run, you cur. Tell all the other curs the law is coming. You tell them I'm coming. And hell's coming with me, boys. The boys is for the guys here. You guys should know that line. Folks.
Wait, what's that from?
Tombstone, boys. Yes, sir. Tombstone. One of the two great movies about our subject this time that were made right around the same time. And they were competing studios trying to outdo the other one. Both of them were excellent pictures. One was more of the adventure. The other is more of a biopic about Wyatt Earp. In many respects, the man who represents in modern today consciousness the Wild West.
Which is kind of ironic because it took a while for that to happen.
That's exactly right. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here. He's since his ascendancy, which took place right after he died in 1929, America has been fascinated by this guy. And he is a fascinating guy. He's been portrayed, especially right off the bat, as this quintessential hero. And he's really not. The real man was not.
He was a flawed man just like all of us.
Right. Yeah. And some of his flaws were greater than many others.
If I can be allowed, I'll sneak in the Trevor Slattery right here. It's complicated.
That's right. That's right. It is very complicated, but that's what's so fascinating about it. That's why I'm wanting to lay him out as a hero, because he's well known, not as well known as he could be, although both of the two movies from the early 90s, Tombstone with Kurt Russell, who I did a terrible job of imitating, but I wasn't really trying to, as the titular character, and actually the better biopic with Kevin Costner playing him in Wyatt Earp, which was literally like that next year. They nail it. They nail it exactly right. They don't. Wyatt Earp lays it all out. They don't skip really much of anything. Whereas Tombstone is a discrete point in time that doesn't contradict anything. But it doesn't tell his whole story.
Yeah, I mean,
it's major. Sorry, I just wanted to say, the thing about the other one about Wyatt Earp, the movie, is it has one major flaw. Mm-hmm. It does not have Val Kilmer.
Doesn't have Val Kilmer.
Which it
is an amazing performance.
It really is, and Dennis Quaid probably nails the true Doc Holliday better, to be honest. He's more accurate to the man. He's this dark, defeated Confederate who is dying of tuberculosis, and he's not the flamboyant, in-your-face, quip-stating, although he does do some of that. Kilmer he made that role his own. Is it accurate? Is it less accurate? Yeah, it's less accurate to the real man. But it's not wrong either.
Yeah.
Because they don't contradict anything.
Well, and Holliday was not an Army veteran.
Not at all.
He had not been a Confederate soldier.
No, he was from Georgia, though.
Yeah,
so he had sympathies there.
Yeah. But the thing about Tombstone, they hint at a lot of the unsavory elements, but kind of let them slide just a touch.
Well, because they are the heroes of the story, and they need to be portrayed that way. Wyatt Earp brings the flaws in along with it, and they recognize this guy is not... He is brutal at times. He is unsavory at times.
And they were kind of a do-anything-for-a-buck crew.
And his life reflects that completely.
Yeah. He was like a boxing referee at one time in the 20s.
That was later. I mean, he actually did that early on out west when he was a very young man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he had done that. And the Kevin Costner movie actually portrays that. And that's one of the moments where he actually, and those are all based on facts. We have the stories, they're dramatized. But ultimately, the fact that Martin Cove plays the actor, guy's named Ed Ross, that they got into this fight because he stopped a fight early, and Ross lost money and almost killed Wyatt Earp. And he wouldn't take any of that, though. He had a temper, and he throws a billiard ball, hits the guy, knocks him down. takes his guns, just like it shows in the movie. That's all very real. And that's one of those moments, that, of course, it's portrayed up dramatically in the movie, that he recognizes, I'm not going to take anything.
Yeah.
They show it as like a coming of age. It was really not that way. He was already there. And he's a fascinating character, and that's one of the reasons I like him so much. He kind of got, by default, this exemplification of the American West. And it's kind of like Davy Crockett kind of got, by default, the Alamo business and all that early 1800s.
Well, a couple of things. One, he had the good fortune to survive
That's
into the movie age.
That's right.
And two, he ended up married to an actress who understood how to tell a story.
That's right.
And so once they started kind of peddling his story and got Stuart Lake to bite, and this book got published, it took off.
It took a phenomenon.
That era of the Western is really kind of this fertile ground for the new motion picture industry.
Oh, but ironically, only one movie about his life was made during his life.
That's right.
So, I mean, for all of his involvement in Hollywood with what was going as an advisor, knowing Tom Mix.
That's right, which had a lot of that. And, it says at the end of the movie that at Wyatt Earp's funeral in 1929, Tom Mix wept. That's very true. That's very accurate. In fact, there was a rather little-known movie made not that many years before Tombstone with James Garner and Bruce Willis called Sunset, which tells that story. James Garner is the old, aging Wyatt Earp, and Bruce Willis, who was in the ascendancy at that time, is Tom Mix. And it's about this unlikely friendship these men develop as Tom Mix is making these movies. And it deals with Earp's death and, how it really affected Mix. And that was kind of the beginning of, all of a sudden, the Western is an ascendancy in a burgeoning Hollywood. And Earp becomes this prototypical lawman.
Yeah.
In many respects, he is the model for every lawman Western picture that came after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's...
And a lot of that's,
powerful.
Again, hugely mythologized.
Very much so.
Even when you start to really dive into and trying to find real things about his life, they're elusive. It is the West, and it is... a lot of records, and people made up stuff, and this and that.
There has been... But Earp scholarship has actually got pretty well developed because... with enough time digging and a lot of folks looking for that, because he became interesting to people. Most of this has been established.
Yeah.
And Stuart Lake's biography was the start of that. But it was very, I don't want to say edited, because it really wasn't. It's all true. But it was sanitized. And that was his wife,
right.
Josephine Marcus.
It's made to put him in the best light. So, generally speaking, though, the Earp family's from Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Wyatt was a war veteran, but the older brothers were, right?
Yes, his two older, James and Virgil, and in the Costner movie speaks of this. They themselves...
And the dad, too, right?
No, but he was a Union sympathizer, because he was a little bit older.
Right, they're Union veterans, a Union family.
Very much so.
From Iowa.
Nicholas was a lawyer. He was very politically connected in this area, too. So this is something that builds into the piece. And Wyatt is just young enough. He's just an early teenager when the war ends.
Yeah.
And his brothers come home. Of course, the Earps had a slew of kids, most of them boys, and all of them are featured in the Costner movie.
Because there's Warren.
Warren is the young one, played by a very young Jim Caviezel at the time. That's right. It's a fairly big part.
So Warren, Morgan, Virgil, Wyatt.
James.
And James.
James is the oldest.
Yeah.
And then Virgil. And then there's a sister in there too. I cannot remember if there's more than one. And they were really formed that familial unit. That's one of the things that makes Wyatt Earp so interesting, because, and the Costner movie brings this out. They talk about, they meet Ed and Bat Masterson along the way, and they talk about they got another brother. He says, "That's all you got? Just one more lousy brother," because he's got, he's got 5.
It's a huge family.
Yeah, it's a huge family. And Nicholas Earp eventually, played by Gene Hackman, by the way, fantastically, they moved to California. There's a restlessness in the Earp family.
Right.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, they move on from Iowa, looking for work, looking for whatever,
Well,
chasing whatever's happening.
Right.
They're looking
boomtown to boomtown.
That's
Yeah,
right. They're
it is.
looking for the big score.
Yeah.
That is endemic. That's exactly
Yeah.
part of that Earp mindset.
Yeah.
Is they're always looking to get rich quick.
Again, that is hinted in Tombstone with, we're winning all these mine claims from these guys in Tombstone.
That's right. Yeah, because they're deliberately go to Tombstone. That's very accurate.
Yeah.
Because they think that there's money there.
Yeah.
And they can.
But
do that.
Kansas, they thought there was money there, and they kind of...
Well, even after all of the stuff with the Cowboys is over and he reunites with Josephine, you would think from the way the movie Tombstone ends that they stay in California. They don't. She goes with him, and they go all over the West.
Oh, yeah.
Boomtown to boomtown still. So he is still doing
That's right,
that,
because
even after he's hooked up with her.
Even though she's part of the Marcus family as in Neiman Marcus.
Oh, I didn't realize
That's
that was
the
Marcus.
connection. She's Jewish too, that's not a well-known thing because she concealed that most of the time because that's not.
It would have been very alien in the West.
That is correct. But she
such
doesn't
an
have as
oddball
much
thing.
money as you might imagine because they keep looking for this score. Everywhere they go, they get involved. They are in San Francisco a while. They end up in Los Angeles, and they go north of the gold rush to Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a brief moment in the Costner film. That's kind of how it ends, and it talks about how as he ages, he's always looking for that big score, and that's one of the reasons. Early on, one of the things that really makes him the true grit person that he ends up to be. The hard ass, which in Tombstone he's not written that way. Kurt Russell doesn't play him that way. He's written as this reluctant guy who's trying to find peace.
Yeah.
That's not Wyatt Earp. That's Hollywood. That's totally inaccurate.
Leave me alone. I just want to make money.
No, that's exactly.
We don't want to get involved here. We just want to make money.
That's right.
It's the
That
portrayal in Tombstone.
is not accurate. That's one of the few
Well, except
criticisms.
for the wanting to make money.
And they do that. Yeah, that's right. But this business of I'm not going to be involved. We're finished with that. Don't you see what's happening here? Those
Yeah,
lines.
that's
Totally inaccurate.
because to make a dime,
Yeah.
to make some money, you want to be connected.
Well, that's right.
Their history is get connected politically. That opens up the doors to making money.
And they do this by being lawmen.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the thing you have to remember about being a county sheriff, seems to be the job they went for the most.
Yeah.
At least in Arizona, when he was there trying to be the county sheriff in whatever the county was that Tombstone was a part of that was about to be broken off.
Yeah.
Yes.
He got 10% of the tax receipts.
Yes.
So it was a very lucrative
It's a big
position.
deal. Yeah. Because that was the point of those jobs is to collect taxes, and you got to keep a piece as your salary.
Right. He was actually city, is what he was in Tombstone. He was the city, city sheriff.
That's when they first came there. But I mean, he was actually later
later
county
on.
sheriff.
Yeah, because
Right,
it was
after John Behan had gone out.
Cochise
That's right.
County split off from, I think it's Pima County.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes.
But there's a lot of these positions out there, especially in a new territory. And part of this, again, is they're used to being connected politically, and they are Union veterans, and they're Republicans.
Yeah.
And there is a contest for control of these new Western territories of, no, we've got to get there first and establish everything because we want these to be Republican places because
That's Union.
we can't let the Democrats in here because they will drag rebellion in.
Yeah, because Democrat equals Confederate equals rebellion.
Yeah.
At this point, this is in the
Clintons,
1880s.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the Clintons were very much that, and they were essentially the local mafia.
Yeah.
But they were the Confederate side, and in many respects, the Earps tried to insinuate themselves into the local municipality as Union people. So it was in many respects, the entire, and it's encapsulated, of course, in the gunfight at the OK Corral, the famous one, but the actual conflict was much longer than that.
Yeah.
Both movies talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, that was hardly the climax of that movie. It showed that the conflict went on and on.
Well, absolutely. Both movies did that.
Yeah.
The gunfight actually takes place about halfway, which that's new for movie portrayals of Wyatt Earp because neither of those movies, they may be the best known, and they kind of image us today, but that story had been done 4 or 5 times.
Hour of the Gun.
Hour of the Gun, which was James Garner again, playing Wyatt Earp again.
Is Robert Ryan in that one?
No, that's Jason Robards plays Doc Holliday in there.
Jason Robards,
and poorly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I've seen it. It's just not that good. My Darling Clementine is still one of the... That's the first
and that's a
big
black
movie.
and white.
It's black and white with
that's
Henry
an old-
Fonda.
Yeah.
And that's the one that catapults... takes that Stuart Lake book, puts it on the screen with a big budget, it's John Ford, and all of a sudden, boom. That's when everybody knows. The book plus My Darling Clementine together... That's the one that made Wyatt Earp a household name.
Yeah,
and
prior to this, Wild Bill Hickok, Calamity Jane, those would have been the biggest names.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
and a lot of that's because...
Especially Hickok.
Mostly because of how he died.
Yeah.
That's the one that most people remember.
Well, in Buffalo Bill Cody, the Wild West show.
Yeah, the Wild West show.
Yes.
That was still a big deal. That was a way to have, the spectacle of what they thought
Correct.
the West was.
But he was a showman, and everybody knew him as showman, and he was revered. But it was a different animal. Earp brings a lawman edge.
Yeah.
That
They were lawmen because they wanted to make money doing it.
that's correct.
Again, it's a political stepping stone to other things. A piece of the tax money.
The Costner
all
movie
that.
makes mention when they get to Tombstone. One of the wives actually the three wives come to talk to Wyatt, and they say, "Here you are again. You came down here, and the brothers will do anything that you say, but here you are again, lawmen and bartenders. That's all you can do."
Yeah.
And that's it's a really good moment
Yeah.
to kind of get you this insight into he's always chasing that next big thing. Sometimes he uses places up, too.
Oh, yeah.
Because it happened in Dodge City. Because he's the lawman there. He's not the sheriff at first. He eventually becomes that. And he's a hard ass. Costner plays him dead straight on. He is an absolute police brutality. Wyatt Earp invented that. Because this place is a lawless town. It makes mention in the movie. They go from 10,000 cattle a year to 100,000, just like overnight. And they need help. And he recruits his brothers and brings them in. And all this stuff, that's where he meets Doc Holliday is during his travels through there.
And basically, if you mouthed off,
Yeah, you
in the least bit, or just gave Wyatt any trouble, you were fortunate that his first compunction wasn't to shoot you.
no.
He
knew better.
his first compunction was, though, to smack you upside the head with his pistol.
That's correct.
He called it buffaloing. They would buffalo people. And it's shown in Tombstone where he does it to one of the McClowry boys, I think it is.
Well, he
knocks
did,
him off the steps.
well, he also does it to Curly Bill Brocious after he kills
Fred White.
Fred White. That's trademark from him.
Yes,
he was famous for that.
He just any kind of lip whack right over the head.
Ironically,
with a pistol.
Wyatt Earp was never wounded ever.
Right.
Ever. Not a single bullet.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, like you said, he's fortunate enough to have survived. He survived in good health. His brother Morgan is literally assassinated, and both movies show this very, very well. He's literally killed over a pool table by the Clanton opposition as a revenge killing against what had happened at the OK Corral. And that's very accurate, although I will admit to you that I'm not a huge fan of... I like Bill Paxton. I think they wussified Morgan Earp a lot in that movie. He gets annoying at times, and it's not Bill Paxton's fault. That's how he was written. Morgan Earp was more of a thug than his brother ever was. Star Trek got him more accurate. The Man Who Kills on Sight, that was Morgan Earp. He was younger.
I was wondering when he was going to bring up the Star Trek episode that had the
had the Earps in it. Yeah, well, that was my first exposure to what happened there. Was Spectre of a Gun from Star Trek. I mean, I was watching this very young, and it was that's how I learned about a lot of this.
Well, that just goes to show you how much the story of the gunfight at the OK Corral had become part of the public consciousness.
Yeah,
that it was the setting for an episode of Star Trek.
Yeah,
and it was trusting the audience not only would get it, but really get it. They knew this story.
Understood immediately what was going to happen.
That's right, because like I said, that had of course you had with Hugh O'Brien, you had a long-running TV series called Wyatt Earp, which had bore nothing like the character at all.
Yeah.
Much less the man, but the character really. It was very different.
Yeah.
But that name lived on. But there was quite a few. Probably the biggest movie before the two that were done in the 90s was Burt Lancaster and Kirk Russell gunfight at the OK Corral.
Yeah.
At which, ironically, DeForest Kelley plays Morgan Earp, of all things.
Yeah.
So it's and he portrays him very differently. The real Earp, Morgan Earp, he was a thug, big time. He was the first guy to get in he was the one that would, would push for the violent actions. Wyatt was more of he was smart. He recognizes you can't go around summarily killing people if you wish to succeed.
It's going to come back on you.
It will come back on you. That's right.
Wait till you get pushed to the edge.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you do it in such a way that you're covered. Wyatt was very clever. Morgan was far more hot-headed. And even though Virgil was older, and he was actually the sheriff of Tombstone. I mean, they showed that in the movies, that he's actually the lawman. The others are all deputies. Nevertheless, it was Wyatt they looked to. And that's a force of personality.
He was a big personality. And like I said, yes, the Costner movie is probably a little more accurate. The Tombstone movie just sort of hints at a lot of things about them.
Yeah, they're never wrong. They don't ever contradict anything.
Yeah,
which I'm very glad for. Other than how Wyatt is written.
Yeah,
and that's for the story reason. But you have to have that tension.
That hint at they're just in it for the money, and these mining claims they're acquiring them somewhat dubiously from drunk card players, and
and that's how they.
And there's a couple of hints there about the women's backgrounds, and like Ike Clanton calls them all pimps. There's something to that.
No, that's
again, sanitized for Tombstone, and they say, "Well, I wonder where he met, his wife." And Virgil and Morgan say, "Well, the same place we met ours."
Well,
they were all pimps. They had all done that.
They had all worked with.
Well, it's real easy to stay in business when you're also the law.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's exactly right. They're managing, not necessarily owning, but managing brothels on the side, which is very lucrative, extremely lucrative.
Yeah.
And that's where they meet the women they eventually marry and bring out of prostitution. Even Josephine Marcus herself, who was wealthy, she's of the Neiman Marcus family, she has a dubious background that dabbled in that.
She also had such a gambling habit, she probably needed the money.
Well, that's exactly right. And so there's where all this kind of came in it. She lobbied hard to control the narrative of Stuart Lake's book. And she wanted all mention of Wyatt's common-law wife, the second wife, Mattie Blaylock, who appears in both movies. Mare Winningham in the Costner version, and I don't remember the actress's name.
Dana Nicholson, I think.
Okay, who played her, actually I thought pretty well.
Yes.
In that who herself committed suicide via drug overdose after the fact.
Mattie, not
Mattie.
Not the actress.
Yeah, no, not at all. The real Josephine Marcus Earp wanted all that expunged. It doesn't appear in the book.
Yeah.
But it comes back later.
Yeah.
And she actually wrote a book herself, I Married Wyatt Earp. By this time, that's because she controls the narrative for a long, long time. But the data is out there. There were many witnesses to a lot of this stuff, and that's something historians have worked to piece together.
Right. It's taken a lot of work to do. You got to dig through old property records and things like that in places like Illinois and Missouri and Iowa,
because
where they lived, and Kansas and all that stuff.
Because he after the family moves west, he comes back east because his grandfather is a judge in Missouri, and he's going to study the law. And the Costner movie talks about this. It slows the movie down a lot, but it's real accurate. He says no. He makes a comment that my grandfather says nobody's ever been a slower learner at the law than me. Well, it's probably true. That was not his. It was not his thing. Yeah. But he meets a girl, Urilla, marries her, and she dies of typhoid. And it's a very dramatic moment in the movie. It's very well played. But that's the only movie that ever bothered to go into that. But that's the formative moment for him. Because he recognizes death is very, very non-discriminating. And it can come at any time. And it's one of the reasons I think that he never feared it. Because that's one of the reasons he is able to go out and take on these unsavory elements with apparently no fear. And that's because he had learned that through that experience. And that's one of the things that the Costner movie really lays out. He really takes his turn towards that tough, hard-ass dark side after that. And in fact, when he meets Josephine Marcus later in Tombstone, she kind of, tell me about this. Tell me about Missouri, Wyatt. And that's when he explains to her that's what put him where he is. Yeah. It's brilliantly done. Again, it's a long movie, relatively speaking. But it really, if you want to know Wyatt Earp, that's my recommendation. I've seen it a dozen times.
So speaking of books,
Isn't this a recent book?
It is. It's very.
I thought I've
recent
seen
book.
that at Sam's. I've almost picked that up a couple of times.
Yes, my son gave that to me for Christmas a year or two ago. He knows of my fascination with Wyatt Earp and with the story. You'll have to read it right there.
right?
Mark.
So in addition to Stuart Lake, again, 1931, you have that.
It's been in print ever since.
Yeah.
It's
This
still
one's called
standard.
Tombstone: The Earp Brothers, Doc Holliday, and the Vendetta Rad from Hell by Tom Clavin.
And Clavin that's a sequel to Clavin's previous book, Dodge City, which tells that portion of their story.
Yes.
So he's put together Clavin does a really great job of putting together the story of the people, the men, the complicated men that they were, and the crucible in where all these things happen. And like I say, you can go to Tombstone today, and of course it's a tourist trap, because it's all about that. And it's amazing. You can go to the OK Corral. You can see that it's become part of our consciousness.
Yeah. And then from my bookshelf is Inventing Wyatt Earp, His Life and Many Legends, Alan Barra. Probably not one I would super recommend. I found it a touch unfocused. But it is from post the films. Mm-hmm. So there's some discussion in the films.
Yeah, the Clavin book is too. It's written
know,
since those movies were
again,
made.
inventing is probably the right word. Because what we know of Wyatt Earp is hugely a myth.
Correct.
Again, they do anything for a buck, from pimp to card shark to whatever.
Fixing fights.
Well, yeah, and that is one of, during Earp's lifetime, his reputation from the OK Corral, which he was still legendary for that event during his life, but he was accused of fixing a fight. I believe it was in San Francisco, and it was a big fight.
Yeah,
and
it was billed as the World Championship fight.
Oh yeah,
it was the most anticipated and can't say most viewed because it wasn't television, but I mean it was the most.
It was Evander Holyfield and Buster Douglas before it ever happened.
Yeah.
And it was longer than that fight. Of course, most fights are longer than that fight.
Yeah.
But he's accused of fixing that, and that charge stuck. Reputationally, he took a huge hit with that, and he never was wealthy, never had money at all. He hires himself out in the 20s as a consultant to the movies, to John Ford.
Yeah.
And that's where, like I say, Tom Mix doing, that's one of the reasons his fame got enough where Lake was saying, let me bio you while he's living. So, and, it's not complete. Generally speaking, it's still the standard, though. It's the one where everybody starts with, and we've learned a great deal since then. Guys, I've been yakking most of this time, and you knew I would, because this is
That's okay.
We're just waiting for you to take a breath.
I am breathing now. Is it bourbon time?
I think it'd be a good bourbon break right here, Captain.
Yeah, well, I hate it when I captain sometimes, especially on something I know very well, like I do the Life of Wyatt Earp, because I'm just going to keep rolling, you guys. But you guys
But
know
that's
that.
okay. That's what makes for an episode.
And you guys are more than
Well, let's
accommodating.
take a short nap
Sure.
after that big lunch we had.
Well, this is true. That's true.
Sometimes with Francis, though, he's rolling off on something, and you got to kind of very gently bat him back into.
That's true.
So that's what I'm trying to make sure he doesn't go too far here.
Well, that's right, because
Again,
not much left to say.
a myth versus a real man.
That's right.
Well, I have some observations that I want to talk about, which, we're probably in territory that I usually bring us into anyway.
Well,
so.
that's fine. But perhaps we should bourbon first.
Yes, bourbon first.
All right. I'm still Basil Haydening it.
Yeah, me too.
I think that makes it unanimous.
I'm really liking this neat. I mean, I like it chilled as well.
That's the way I've been drinking it lately, and it's very satisfying. It's very satisfying.
Very flavorful.
Yeah, I like that, and it's something that I can kick back with that, and I can either throw it back and it doesn't, it's nice,
Well,
or
that's a waste
sip
to
it.
just toss it back. That's a
It's-
sipping bourbon.
It's rare, but I will occasionally do that, just because especially if it's neat. You're not worrying when you get to the bottom of the glass. You think, "Well, just throw it back." That's usually how I finish it. I don't feel like I'm getting the dregs if it's watered down for whatever reason. Not that it is. I mean, that's part of the experience. It's a legitimate way of enjoying bourbon.
The ice and water, as we have discovered, brings out different flavors.
Yes.
So,
That's correct. So it's a very
Yes. The water accentuates different parts of the profile.
Yes, and the chill does as well. I mean, it's amazing to me.
As opposed to any other mixing thing that you might consider it's been done by
Yes. We try to avoid that, except for the very low shelf bourbons.
That's correct. Yes. Well, hey.
It's just so good and mellow and smooth. Wonderful woodsy character to it.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of the good maple syrup to it, and good stuff.
Yeah.
Very much so.
The thing I like about this, one of the things that, especially the lower end bourbons, I think you find this more often, but you often get almost like an oily texture to them.
Yep.
And that is definitely not the case with the finer bourbons, and you do not get that, especially for the ones that have, I think, that hit the mouth a little more. This is not like that, because you do get a nice bit in the mouth as well, all the way down, and you don't get that. It's just very fine stuff.
Love it. Yeah. You had a comment, sir.
Yes. So, what were we talking about again? I lost track of. Oh, yes, it was Wyatt Earp. Sorry. We've talked about this somewhat in context when we were talking about westerns, because obviously, we were covering a little bit of the same ground there.
Yeah, we're right.
And one of the things that we brought out in the westerns episode was how the whole move to the west, all of the stuff that went on, all the gunfights and all that, is very much an outgrowth of the Civil War.
Yep, an extension of it.
And it's also an example of what happens when you don't know what to do with all of those veterans. Who, as you've talked about, Martin, and I think when we talked about this in the Western episode, was, they were, it was all PTSD. Right? Not all, but there was a good deal of that going on before they knew what it was.
Yeah, what do you do with all these excess killers?
Yeah, because you've trained...
Let's send them home.
Yeah, that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And I think what you see with the Earps, even with Wyatt, even though he does not serve in the Union Army, he still is infected with this same mentality. And you often see, I believe this is accurate, and if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I believe this is an accurate observation. But you will often see this restlessness and this having to move on to the next thing with many that have PTSD because they're trying to get away from it. And you could probably argue that for all he went through, he could have had his own form of PTSD.
Oh, I would say, looking back on that, I'm sure. I think you couldn't have lived that in
that violent life.
That violent life. You're exactly right. Even though he himself was never wounded, his time as a lawman, particularly in Dodge City, with his hard ass approach to things. There's no question he's acting out.
That is a part of Tombstone that's accurate. He tells Morgan, hey, I've only ever been mixed up in one shooting in all those years working those cow towns.
And that's exactly right.
Just that one. Up until Tombstone, again, his preference was when he had a chance, he would just hit you over the head with something.
That's correct. I mean, he was
not in the street and shoot you like in a movie.
Yeah, that's right. Lethal force was not something that was going on because there were consequences to that.
Yeah.
And he knew that. And that's why I say Wyatt Earp was smarter than your average bear here. And that's one of the reasons he was so successful at what he did. And in Dodge City, they paid you, most of your salary came from your number of arrests. They pay you a very meager salary and so much for each arrest. Well, come on.
What are you paid by the ticket, you're right.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And of course he's going to do that. When you've got 100,000 head of cattle coming in this place and all that goes with that, and these guys, it's not
there's
hard to
going to
do.
be plenty of opportunities to arrest people.
It was a hard life. I mean, that whole being on the trail, pushing those cattle up from Texas up to the railhead in Kansas, it was rough. I mean, there's no kidding. It's weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of just all day on the horse and collapsing into the brush at night and getting back up and doing it over again.
Yep,
exactly.
And it was, and they weren't usually called cowboys.
No.
Cowboys really was at that time used for rustlers.
Right.
That was when you call somebody a cowboy, you were basically calling them a crook.
Right.
Which
is one of the reasons
you were a ranch hand or something like that.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons that the syndicate, the group in Tombstone, they took that name.
Yeah,
because they're trying to legitimize themselves, saying we really are this. Watch out. I mean, they said that God bless Powers Booth, may he rest in peace, fantastic actor who played Bill Brocious so very well. He says, next time we come, you better step aside. That's exactly what that whole group was about. They established that the villainy of that organization very clearly in that movie, first scene in.
Yeah. But, this... I just find this whole thing fascinating, how his life is such a great illustration of this. Almost every generation that goes to war, it becomes its own kind of lost generation, because they often don't know what to do afterwards.
Yeah.
And you very much see this with what goes on in the West, and his life in particular is so indicative of that. When you look at all the things he did, all the contradictory things that he did.
Yes.
He's a lawman who manages brothels and marries a prostitute, and then marries later a woman who may or may not have been a prostitute, but certainly had her own issues.
Right. She had a history, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it was not genteel society.
Exactly. Well, yes. I mean, this is still a time when an actress was not necessarily the most well-respected job a woman could have. I mean, it wasn't quite as bad as in the medieval times, or even pre-colonial times, where they were literally actresses and prostitutes.
That's right. That was part of the deal.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't nearly that bad, although she seems maybe to have taken it to heart. I don't know.
But still, it was said she was. Yeah, at one point.
This whole restlessness, this whole idea of trying to figure out what you are and who you are, is, to me, is kind of interesting, because in a way it kind of mirrors some of what was going on with the country at this time. Because after the Civil War, granted, this all takes place after Reconstruction for the most part.
Right. Just prior to that.
Yeah.
Just after that, exactly.
Yeah. So, but he's come into his formative years during that, when the country's still trying to figure out how to be a country again. And I think that had to have had an effect on all of these guys.
It's almost like with him, or with the family, if we could just make some money, that'll cure this.
Right.
It'll cure
That's
this.
right.
It's what's inside of us. We don't know what it is, but money ought to fix it.
Right. Which is not an uncommon thing.
Yeah.
And as we all know, that money does not fix anything. It just magnifies what you already are.
Right. And
I mean, it can fix a lot of things. When you're talking about yourself,
Yeah.
It does not help you.
It doesn't fix what's inside of you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that he continued on and on and on. And the legend, we're the beneficiaries of learning the legend because of was yet another attempt at getting some money. His wife realized, this legend you have, this image you have, we can make money on that now.
Right. Because I'm really getting tired of going out to the mine every summer.
Yeah.
And working it, because that's literally what they did at the end of his life.
Yeah.
When they finally settled in L.A., he spent the summers working the mines, and then the winters he was in L.A. Doing things for the police, or then later consulting with the movie industry.
Yeah, you're talking in his 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Right. So, working the mines, whether you're just managing people doing it, or if you're doing it yourself, either way, that's still hard work. So I'm sure, and considering how much they moved around, it's kind of interesting that they finally stayed in one place that long. Because that was because once they finally bought a house together, they never really moved on from that until after he died, I guess. But that's just interesting how constantly on the move. That just says to me, you're searching for something and you're not finding it.
And Earp had a reluctance for relationships, with two great exceptions in his life.
Committed relationships.
Committed relationships. You're right. Well, bearing in mind he has his family and his brothers. He comes with that. So he's not in as much need of it as you might imagine. He's not a lonely person at all. He's very social. But he has two great relationships in life. One of which is his wife, his third and final wife, Josephine Marcus. They were married for 46 years. It says at the end of Tombstone, for all that time they never left each other's side. That's pretty much true.
Well,
they were together.
Actually, there were some periods, like when he was in Alaska, she came back to San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I think there's some other periods in some of my reading. But for the most part, yes, they were together.
Yeah. And they did view themselves as, a team is probably not the right word, but
it's got that aspect.
They felt like they were in life together
Yeah.
in a way that maybe he did not feel with, say, Maddie.
Right.
So,
but of course, the one man we hardly mentioned here is Doc Holliday.
it's Holiday.
Well,
Yeah.
because it's about Wyatt.
Well, that's correct, and we could do a whole episode probably on Doc Holliday.
Oh, we almost should, but we'd just sit here quoting his lines from Tombstone.
That's right, and in many respects, Val Kilmer doesn't do the character a favor. He does it justice, my God, yes, but he doesn't do it a favor because he does such a great job. Nobody can ever top that. Dennis Quaid, if you watch that movie, the Costner movie with Dennis Quaid, he is Doc Holliday. He lost an enormous amount of weight for that movie. He nails that character. If you read, and Holliday's life was documented, much of which by Earp himself, because John Holliday dies at the age of 36. Yeah. He dies in the 1880s, for goodness sakes.
Right.
So Wyatt, wrote about him. That was one of his ways of making money, and it also, gave his own money.
The scene in Tombstone, he hands him the book, My Friend Doc Holliday.
That's right. And he wrote that.
Really, he tried writing and newspapering and all kinds of stuff to make him money.
And Holliday was, in many respects, the darker version.
Yeah.
Even though Wyatt Earp was very dark himself, it's one of the reasons they were such good friends. But they had a friendship bond that served. That's one of the few consistencies in every portrayal, every movie portrayal, that you always link to that friendship between these two guys. And that's a powerful statement right there. It really is. Holliday was dying of tuberculosis. He was very much a killer. He had no fear of death, just like Wyatt didn't, but for different reasons. Because for him, that's an end to the suffering.
It's around the corner anyway.
That's right. So who cares? If you wrong me, I will literally gut you. It shows the scene at the beginning with Ed Bailey where he takes a knife out. Well, that really happened. It's documented. He literally eviscerated Bailey over a card game, and his reputation would precede him because he was a he says Dennis Quaid portrays him so well when he first meets Wyatt. He says, "I'm a sporting man. I'm not a killer," which is of course stating that yes, I really am, but I'm trying to get over that, and I'm working through that, and for whatever reason.
Yeah. What made them friends is it's still a little bit of a mystery, but early on they had met before Tombstone. They really did.
Oh, very much so.
And for some reason, Holliday backed Wyatt in some kind of standoff type situation where Wyatt was in deep doo-doo.
Yeah.
But Holliday backed him.
Yep.
And from that point on, they were buds, and they would always back each other.
They met each other, and the Costner movie does a pretty good job of showing that moment, because you really want that moment when these two great, historically known great friends meet. And it was when Wyatt was actually doing some private investigative work because he'd lost his job in Tombstone. I mean, in Dodge City. Yeah. And they end up working together to share a reward about a guy named Dave Rudabaugh. And they just talk, and it's kind of like Holliday sees, I don't have any friends. He says that in the movie.
Yeah.
And, do you believe in friendship? Which is a little bit of conceit, but it's kind of like they recognize kindred spirits in each other.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a lot of similarity between the two.
That's exactly it.
Granted, this is just going by what I've seen on the screen more so than any real research, but presuming it's, as you say, they don't get anything wrong, if they don't portray everything fully. You see, I think Doc has accepted the kind of, at least in the movie, the kind of man that he is, which is very flawed. Although I love in the end how he and the good father are exploring the mysteries of Rome together.
Well, and he makes mention at the end of Tombstone when he's in the bed about how he had an affair with his cousin. That actually did happen. I mean, that was the love of his life.
Right, the only woman he ever loved.
And she literally, because she was his cousin, first, she left and went to a nunnery, and literally, and that was one of the reasons that he kind of left Georgia originally. And of course, the tuberculosis, because he had a dental practice, moderately successful in Griffin, Georgia, where he was from, and eventually it was the tuberculosis that got him. And it said, if you want to live, you need to get out west to the dry climate. And along the way, he gave up dentistry and began gambling because, screw this, I'm going to die tomorrow, as far as he knew, and that's kind of
Right.
what built
Of course, fell in with Big Nose Kate.
That's correct. Who did not have, because there's pictures of her. Her big nose means that she keeps sticking her big nose into things. That's what she, and it says so in the Isabella Rossellini plays her.
Oh.
In the costume movie, and she does a great, fantastic job because she's a beautiful
Isabella
woman.
Rossellini from that time period.
Yeah, she's a beautiful woman,
gorgeous,
and in fact, when Dennis Quaid and her ride into to Dodge City, because Wyatt's there, and it's a good gambling town, and they know that, so they it's kind of like, I got an in here, I know a guy. I know a guy.
Yeah.
And he introduces her as Kate Elder, which there's some debate. Her name may have been Kate Fisher, but we're not real sure. But that's what they decided on.
Well, I mean,
Sons of Katie Elder?
Your name was one thing in one town, and then when you got into trouble, you went to another town and changed it.
That's exactly right.
And it's not like you had a driver's license to prove it.
That's right. So that's kind of what...
Or even a birth certificate.
Or a social security number.
And she says, call me Big Nose Kate, and of course... they all look at her. She goes, "No, it's not that big. There's all sorts of reasons somebody gets a name." Which she seems this wonderfully, decent person. Although she was a prostitute, we know that. Mm-hmm. But her and
she may have been the devil.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Then again, you may be the Antichrist.
Well, that's right. She comes across more of a sycophant to Wyatt. I mean, to Doc. In the movie Tombstone,
she does. Yes,
she's really not. And Isabella Rossellini and Dennis Quaid, they have a knockdown drag out, and he beats the snot out of her, and she's about to shoot him, and Wyatt comes in. She says, "No, you're not shooting anybody today, Kate." And that's very true. They had a very tempestuous relationship.
It's cut out of Tombstone. They did shoot a scene where they had a bad fight and a breakup before the Vendetta ride.
Right, and that's all that.
Why are you leaving me to go get killed with Wyatt? Basically,
that's part of it, but they had back and forth constantly.
Yeah,
and of course, John Holliday, he didn't care. He has no human compassion to speak of because he's dying.
Yeah.
And it was a long, slow death. He had tuberculosis for probably a decade, and it shows eventually after the Vendetta ends, he has to go to the sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which they show that piece. In Tombstone, they don't in Wyatt Earp, and it's kind of like, this is it. But they had that amazing friendship with each other.
So real quick, I want to do this to you again. So Robert and I have kind of been on the sort of skeptic side of this. Like we get the myth, but he's not a hero. Is maybe a little strong for the two of us.
Yeah, well, I think, for me, Wyatt Earp is one of those guys that falls into the people you should know aspect of this segment of our show.
Yes.
Just like Nietzsche is one of those ones you should know, but he's no hero.
Yeah.
It's not of mine.
Yeah, and I don't think we did Nietzsche as a hero. We just did a lot of quotes, didn't we? We did a history episode.
We did a history episode.
Yeah. Sometimes the history and the hero ones kind of conflate because
they get similar.
Yeah,
but it's right. So we batted that around of he's interesting. The myth is something. These stories are but Francis here put him on the schedule as a hero.
I did
as a hero.
I did.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you a lot of times when you put people on.
Why the hell did you pick this guy?
Well, why is he a hero to you?
Because he's flawed. I believe heroes... I do not like the Marble Man. As...
Interesting, yes.
I do not like that. I like the real-life heroes who do great things or greatly known things and yet retain their complexity. And you cannot study and read about Wyatt Earp without understanding this man was deeply flawed.
Oh, yeah.
So, then I still have to ask the follow-up. What heroic things did he do? Because that was part of what your definition was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he became a legend. That's all it needed. The gunfight at the OK Corral.
Lots of criminals become legends.
That's right.
John Dillinger's a legend. That didn't make him a hero.
Jesse James is a legend.
But...
And Earp's not far from James. I mean, they're separated by one's a Union man, one's a Confederate.
That's part of it.
And also, one lived and one didn't.
Well, I don't know that Earp ever robbed any banks, but
no, exactly. There is there might be moral questions about him.
But definitely. That's not a mic.
That's right. But legally so. I mean, he's never on the wrong. Well, I don't want to say never because he steals a horse in Arkansas and almost gets hung for it. His father has to get him out, and there was serious question about whether he murdered the guys, the Clantons, as part of the vendetta afterwards or at the OK Corral.
Yeah, I mean the vendetta ride is very loosely legalized, but the idea of him being some kind of U.S. Marshal. His remit as a marshal would have been to go arrest them.
That's right.
And they didn't. I mean,
there
wasn't much of a gunfight into a lot of those. I mean, they just out and out just shot anybody they thought was involved in Morgan's murder.
That's correct. And the sheer badassery of that.
Yeah.
There's part of that.
Yeah.
Is even though, it's he badassed his way out, won the day, and lived to tell about it. And sometimes that's just enough.
I don't know. The reason I don't put him on that strictly in the hero column, is that if he were truly just the Wyatt Earp of Tombstone, I could go with that. Because he seems to be, other than leaving his wife who was addicted for the actress, which I still think that's a huge mark against him. But. For there, he's shown, for the most part, to be a fairly heroic guy.
Yeah,
he's going after the obvious bad guys.
Well, Kurt Russell just idolizes him. He wore that mustache and still does quite often. And he'll do interviews
it's an epic mustache.
It really is. Kurt Russell pulls it off. I mean, and if you see the photos of Wyatt Earp, of which there are most of the ones that's the most famous one, has that
this
big
cover one from this Alan Barr book. It looks a ton like Russell.
That's the one. And so it's on the Lake book as well. That is. And in fact, Russell has even gone back and shown side-by-sides of himself trying to recreate that. So it was a truly amazing connection that they had.
Right, but my point, though, is that movie is only one small segment of the rest of the life.
Right.
And the rest of the life has a lot of dubious bits.
Yeah, it's a lot more ambiguous. And
it is, and that's one of the reasons I prefer the Costner movie, because it does not shy away from his flaws, but it also goes to the extent, and I talked about this a little bit, of explaining why. And it's a fascinating character study to realize how somebody can be so wounded by their upbringing, family of origin, world they created in, and rise to notoriety, perhaps not all that glorious. Well, it was glorious. There's no doubt about that. It was Gowron type glorious.
Well, Gowron type glorious is not necessarily real glory.
Well, that's good, but that's where the legend come from. And
but again,
I'm fascinated by that legend.
Not to because I'm not arguing whether or not he is with you, because that's not my point. But to me, it's just.
What's noble there?
Yeah.
No, there's...
to me, a hero needs to have some bit of nobility. Yes, he's going to be flawed, because we're all human.
Yeah.
And it is the overcoming one's flaws that is often what is heroic. I don't see Wyatt Earp doing a whole lot of the overcoming of his flaws.
No,
which is what keeps me from putting him on the pedestal.
So what we're saying here is that you and I need to look over the schedule more closely when Francis starts putting people on.
I think that's exactly the takeaway.
It's entirely up to you guys, of course. We each...
that was so harsh.
It was.
After he fed us all this great food, I feel bad now.
But he teed it up for you so well.
Just go have to watch it more closely.
Well,
he bumped it. I did the set. You spiked it.
I'm truly of a belief that he is a person that we should know. And if you
I agree with that. Right. I agree with that. Like I said, I agree with that. He is the people we should know aspect of this segment.
And for somebody like us, the snakes and otters and what we're about, demythologizing him is important.
Fortunately, the data is there. Yeah. It's been done.
Yeah.
But in people's minds, it's not.
Right.
Because if you ask people who remember the movies, they don't remember Costner's version. They remember Kurt Russell's.
It did. Right. It did much better box office. It hung on cable. The story is so much faster.
Of TNT.
Yeah.
Which in many respects is kind of a shame because
there's a ton of great performances. I mean, Stephen Lang, Sam Elliott, all super duper. The Val Kilmer performance is
Billy Bob Thornton
is probably the highlight of his career. I mean, everybody says that was pretty much Kilmer's
finest
best he's ever performed. So
both are great movies. You should, listeners, you should give the Costner version a watch. This was not far after Dances with Wolves, so this was kind of like his return to that Western genre that he had proved he could do so well, and still would. I mean, he did several Westerns after that, and he nails it. He absolutely nails that character. If Tombstone had not happened, he would be the quintessential portrayal. But they competed with each other. Which was
it's kind of like several years after that when the two asteroids going to hit the Earth movie,
Deep Impact and Armageddon. That's right.
It came out basically the same time.
Yeah, that's right. And one person says, one studio decides to make it, and another one hears about it, saying, "Okay, well, we can do that quicker and better." And usually, the cheaper one gets to the box office first, and it is what it is.
And ironically enough, Armageddon has two alumni from Wyatt Earp stories, Billy Bob and Bruce Willis.
That is correct. That's exactly right. I love Billy Bob Thornton, by the way.
Yes, he's excellent. Yes.
Hell of an actor. If you haven't seen Goliath, you should watch that show. It's on Amazon Prime. It's really good.
So what's next, man?
We're going to shift gears. We're going pop culture next time, and Robert's taking command. He's going to sit in the captain's chair. And again, I say this all the time. I can't believe it took us this long to get here. We're going Looney Tunes, folks. This was a part of our growing up.
Yes.
And it's they've fallen out of use in many ways. We'll talk a lot about how that happened. They are very much emblematic of the times in which they were created, which is not always a good thing. But many of them are also hella good. We're going to try and... Well, we won't shy away from the bad, but we're going to try and frame them in. These were pretty cool stuff anyway. So join us.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week, same snake time, same otter channel.